One rainy night, David, an ordinary taxi driver, decides to refuse to accept money from a young woman holding a baby and in despair. The next morning, he receives a strange call from a wealthy family he has never heard of. What made them seek him out, and why did his small act touch their hearts? The unexpected encounter opens up a new path that David never imagined, leading him from a life of struggle to life-changing opportunities. But that miracle not only changes his life, but also sends a profound message about the power of kindness. Hello everyone, today Kindness Stories channel will send you an extremely attractive story promising to leave us with many positive things about this life. David lives in a rundown apartment complex in upstate New York, where honking cars and bright street lights are his only companions late at night. Now 45, David had big dreams when he was younger, but life events have forced him to put those ambitions on hold. Driving a taxi wasn't his first choice, but it paid the bills and helped him get by. In recent months, rising gas prices and dwindling tips have made him more anxious about the future. One rainy afternoon, while David was tiredly waiting for customers on the street corner, he received a request to pick up a customer from a nearby bus stop. When he arrived, he saw a young woman holding a child of about 2 years old tightly in her arms. She stood in the rain, her hair soaked, her eyes red, looking like she had been crying for a long time. When the car door opened, she carried her child inside, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please take me downtown, I don't have enough money, but..." David looked through the rearview mirror. The baby in her arms started to cry from the cold, its small face wrinkled. Without hesitation, David nodded slightly and said in a calm voice, "Just sit down. You don't need to worry about money." No one said anything during the long drive. David drove in silence, but he occasionally glanced at the woman in the mirror. Although he didn't know what her story was, he could see the pain and despair on her face. When they arrived, Rachel, the woman, tried to give David the last few coins in her pocket, but he shook his head slightly. "Keep this money. Take care of the child first." Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and surprise. She whispered, "Thank you, truly." Then she quickly picked up her child and got out of the car and disappeared into the rain. David sat back in the driver's seat and let out a sigh. He knew he had just lost a small amount of money, but he felt relieved, as if he had done something right in this difficult life. The next morning, David woke up later than usual. He had driven until midnight yesterday to make up for the free ride. Looking at the pale sunlight streaming through the curtains, he stretched, trying to shake off the fatigue from the day before. A new day had begun, with nothing but the same rides and hurried customers. As David sat down at the dining table with a steaming cup of coffee, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. An unknown number. At first, he hesitated to answer, because such calls were usually just advertisements or wrong numbers. But finally, David pressed the answer button. "Hello, is this David?" a polite voice answered. "Yes, it's me. Who is calling?" David replied, his voice still a little sleepy. "I'm Mr. Benjamin Crawford's assistant. He wants to see you. He says it's very important and related to something yesterday," the man said slowly, as if afraid David wouldn't understand. David frowned, the image of the young woman and child from yesterday flashing through his mind. "Benjamin Crawford? I'm sorry, but I don't know anyone by that name." "You may not know him, but he knows about you. The Crawfords would love to meet you as soon as possible." David was silent for a moment, his heart beating a little faster. The Crawfords, a name he had never heard of. But with a mixture of curiosity and concern, he replied, "Okay, where do they want to meet me?" After getting the address, David quickly got ready and got in the car. The address led to a wealthy suburb in the north of the city. The paved roads were smooth, lined with shady trees and large villas with luxurious iron gates, a complete contrast to the old apartment complex where he lived. The taxi stopped in front of a large gate. A man in a suit was waiting for him and led him inside. David was surprised as he walked through the meticulously manicured grounds, the fountains glistening in the sunlight, and the white mansion that exuded nobility. He felt out of place in this lavish space. The large door opened, and David was invited into the living room. The interior almost overwhelmed him. Velvet sofas, sparkling crystal chandeliers on the ceiling, and large paintings on the walls. In the middle of the room, a middle-aged man with silver hair, but a face that exuded authority, sat next to a noble woman. Standing nearby was the young woman from the day before, Rachel, with the child obediently in her arms. "David, is it? Welcome," said Mr. Benjamin Crawford, his voice warm but commanding. David nodded slightly, unable to hide his embarrassment. "Hello? I don't know why I'm here, but you said it was important." Rachel approached, her eyes filled with gratitude. "David, these are my parents. I told them about your kindness yesterday. You helped me when I had nothing left. I don't know what to say other than thank you." Benjamin looked at David, his eyes sharp but sincere. "Rachel is my only daughter. She called us yesterday after seeing you. She was at the worst point in her life, and your kindness gave her hope. That's something we can't ignore." David was slightly embarrassed, his hands clasped tightly on his knees. "I was just doing what I had to do. Seeing her in trouble, I couldn't take money from them." Mr. Benjamin smiled gently, looked at his wife, then turned back to David. "The world needs more people like you, and we want to show our gratitude. But first, let's talk a little more." David was surprised by Mr. Benjamin's serious attitude and the sincerity of this family. He could not believe that a small action yesterday would bring him here. His heart was filled with unanswered questions, but he felt that this was a strange turning point, and perhaps his life was about to change forever. David sat on the large sofa in the Crawford family's luxurious living room, feeling like he was in another world. Everything around him exuded wealth and nobility he had never dreamed of. Rachel sat beside him, holding a sleeping baby in her arms, while Mr. Benjamin and Mrs. Catherine watched him with sympathetic eyes. "David, I know you are a humble man," Mr. Benjamin said, his voice soft but firm. "You helped our daughter in her most difficult time, and we believe that kindness should never be forgotten. We wanted to express our gratitude." David shook his head quickly, feeling uncomfortable with the suggestion. "Honestly, I didn't do anything big. Anyone would have done the same if they saw her in that situation." Mrs. Catherine smiled gently, her voice soft but understanding. "That may be true, but the fact is that not everyone does what you do. You choose to help even though you yourself are poor. That is what makes you different." Faced with their sincerity, David could only bow his head in silence. Mr. Benjamin took out a large white envelope from the drawer and gave it to him. "This is our small gift, a way to help you change your life for the better." David hesitantly took the envelope, his heart pounding as he opened it. Inside was a check for an unbelievable amount, $50,000. He stared at the check, hardly believing what he was seeing. Mr. Benjamin, I can't accept this money. This is too much," David stammered, his hands shaking as he placed the check back into the envelope. Mr. Benjamin smiled, his eyes firm but not forceful. "You deserve this, David. Life sometimes rewards those who do the right thing. And I believe you will use this money to change your life." Rachel spoke up, her voice filled with gratitude. "David, if it weren't for you yesterday, my son and I wouldn't know what to do. You gave me faith in humanity, in goodness, when I thought I had lost everything. My family just wants to make sure you don't have to worry about the future anymore." David sat still, his heart filled with an indescribable feeling. Part of him was still hesitant, because he had never received anything so great before. But deep down, he also knew that this was not just a gift, but also an opportunity for him to change the life he had been struggling to hold on to for so long. After a long silence, David looked up at Mr. Benjamin and Rachel, his voice soft but sincere. "I don't know what to say other than thank you. This is really beyond my imagination. I promise to use this money wisely." Mr. Benjamin nodded in satisfaction and continued, "In addition, we have another offer. My family needs a reliable personal driver, and Rachel has spoken highly of you. If you agree, this job will be yours, with a stable salary and decent benefits." David looked up, his eyes filled with surprise. A stable job? With a good salary? That was nothing more than a dream for him, who had to live in uncertainty from day to day. He hesitated, not because he refused, but because he still couldn't believe this great luck. Can I think for a moment? This is really sudden," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "Of course," Mr. Benjamin smiled. "Think about it and give us an answer. There's no need to rush." David stood up, said goodbye to the Crawford family before leaving the mansion. As he stepped out of the large gate, he looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the cool morning air. In his pocket was a check for $50,000, and his mind was filled with confused thoughts about his new job. For the first time in years, David felt like his life was taking a new path. He looked forward, filled with hope and faith that sometimes small actions can change a person's destiny. A year has passed since David stepped through the gates of the Crawford family mansion. His life has changed completely, from a struggling taxi driver to a trusted chauffeur for a wealthy family. But most importantly, he has found confidence in himself and the value of kindness. With the support of Mr. Benjamin and the savings from his steady job, David started his own small transportation service. The company was called Second Chance Rides, a name that evoked kindness and opportunity in life. David recruited drivers who had been through the same struggles he had, people who had lost their jobs, were struggling with debt, or were looking for a fresh start. He wanted the company to be more than just a place to make money, but also a place where people could start over. In his new job, David never forgot what changed his life. He always told the story of the woman in the rain as an inspiration to his employees. He told them, "We don't know who is sitting in our car. One day, your small act of kindness can make a big difference. Always treat customers well, not because they pay you, but because they are human beings fighting their own battles." One day, David received an invitation to a charity party for the Crawford family. The party was held at the most luxurious hotel in the city, with the participation of many businessmen, celebrities, and major philanthropists. Rachel was the one who sent the invitation. She called David and said cheerfully, "David, my family would like you to come to the party. It is a special occasion and we cannot miss you." David, although not used to lavish parties, could not refuse Rachel's invitation. That evening, he put on the new suit that Mr. Benjamin had given him a few months ago, got into his car and drove to the hotel. When he entered the magnificent hall, he felt like he was lost in another world. But the special thing was that he no longer felt lost or self-conscious. The past year had taught him a lot about self-worth and how to stand firm in any situation. The party took place in a warm and solemn atmosphere. Crystal chandeliers shone throughout the space and laughter resounded loudly. In the middle of the party, Mr. Benjamin stepped up to the podium to give a speech. He thanked the guests for coming and talked about the meaning of kindness in life. Then he suddenly mentioned a special story. "There was a man who did a very small thing, but his kindness saved my daughter and my nephew at their most difficult time. He didn't know who my daughter was, and he didn't expect anything in return. It was his unconditional kindness that reminded us that sometimes a small act of kindness can change a life." The entire auditorium fell silent as they listened. Rachel stood up, holding her son, walked over to David and took his hand. She pulled him forward, under the gaze of hundreds of people in the auditorium. David was confused, but could not refuse. "This is David, the man who helped me and my son when I lost all hope in life. He not only saved me, but gave me a chance to return to my family," Rachel said, her voice filled with emotion. The entire hall erupted in applause. David stood there, feeling his eyes sting. This was the first time he had been recognized in such a formal way. He had just been a taxi driver that day, doing what he thought anyone would do. But now, he realized that kindness, no matter how simple, could create extraordinary power. After the party, David stood on the balcony looking down at the city lights. Rachel approached him, smiling gently. "David, you have not only changed my life, but also yours. You have inspired me and many others to believe in kindness." David smiled, his eyes looking off into the distance. "I think sometimes life just needs a little shake-up, a sudden decision, and everything changes. I never expected that action to bring me here. And most importantly, you didn't let that opportunity pass you by," Rachel said. "You took it and made it happen." A week after the party, David sat in his small office. A simple photo hung on the wall, an old taxi parked in the rain with the words below, "Sometimes a small act of kindness can open big doors. Always choose kindness." He looked at the photo and smiled. The journey from a poor taxi driver to a small business owner was not a miracle, but the result of making the right choices at the most crucial moment. David knew he would continue to help others, just as he had been helped. He had learned a valuable lesson. Kindness doesn't have to be grand, it just has to be sincere, and it always finds a way to come back to us, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Life, after all, rewards those who keep believing in the good, and David is living proof of that. How do you feel about this story? And what touched your heart the most? Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to receive notifications about my latest videos.